Fox Valley Headline Makers. I'm your host today, Tyler Bachman, and joined with two very great guests out here today. First up, Dr. Amaal Tokars, Kendall County Health Department, with us today.
Tyler.
Thank you for joining us.
Happy
And
to be here.
an old favorite, Chief Jonathan Whowell with the Plano Police Department. Thank you for joining us, Chief.
Thank you, Tyler. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to talk about some very important, well, really one very important topic today, and a lot that goes into it. Before we kind of get started talking about the opioid crisis today, I wanted to just kind of give a brief introduction for both of you and kind of how you got to come to your related fields. So Dr. Tokars, what interests you in health, I suppose, first off, to get involved in medicine and studying things of that sort?
Well, I actually started out in research. So my first job was in high energy physics at doing sociological research, actually at Argonne National Laboratories. That was my first area of work, and my interest was doing research that would make positive changes for human conditions.
Yeah.
And so that was really my first area that I got into. I ended up getting into healthcare a little bit later when my children were going to school, and I realized I could help people directly, and I worked at nights in health facilities that were doing psychiatric work, and then I ended up going to school, furthering my education and clinical work, and then later going on and getting my doctoral work, and then went on to public health work maybe about 20 years ago.
Being that you're an expert in the field, really what are some of the things that you've seen probably change the most in your time that you've worked in the healthcare business?
One of the things that I see in the community is a recognition and manifestation of increased anxiety in individuals and in the population. And then in the field, what we see is, as we watch what's happening, is a relationship, we call it comorbidity, between mental health and addiction. And together we call this behavioral health, but most people think of it as mental health and addiction. So I'll just read you this. Data shows that persons diagnosed with a mood or anxiety disorder are twice as likely to suffer also from a drug disorder, and likewise, persons diagnosed with drug disorders are twice as likely to also suffer with a mood or anxiety disorder. Now, drug disorders can bring out those anxiety disorders, but many people will also explain that the anxiety disorder was there already.
Right.
And so this is something that we are recognizing and seeing, and the people that we work with are explaining this to us as well.
Sure. Chief Whowell, we've talked with you before about your background really in policing, but I think one of the things that people really don't realize is the role that you guys also play in mental health. It comes down to more than just making an arrest on somebody and sending them to jail, right? So tell us a bit about your background as the police chief, but then also working with individuals who may struggle from some of the things we're talking about.
It's important to, I really like Amaal's definition of how she got involved in healthcare, and it's a very similar path that I had. I wanted to help people. Police and law enforcement. There's many different people that get involved in a law enforcement career, but they all get involved for the twofold thing that we're all about, and it's service, right, and protection. And a lot of people think more of police officers as that protection mode.
Sure.
The security aspect of it. I walk through the airport, I know I'm safe because the guy over there has a gun and he's watching everybody for bad behavior.
Right.
Right. But what about the officer that helps the old lady with her luggage, or somebody that has a handicap and he holds the door? And I really was a person who wanted to get involved and be involved in service and how we can improve the service. Yeah. And law enforcement is learning over the years, and you see all these crises happening. Look, the media is very important, and law enforcement never really noticed that and didn't respond to that. And not only is the media important, our relationship, that we get the right stories, tell the right information, and social media just blew up. I mean, these kids are learning and having access to things that we didn't as kids.
Yeah.
And whether or not it's pornography or drugs, synthetic drugs are a huge problem.
Yep.
Kids are ordering it online, you know, and so there's that whole thing. And then, you know, law enforcement had a little bit of a drag to go, hey, how are we implementing these things? And when 9/11 happened, we said, hey, what about the communication aspect?
Yeah.
How come, you know, the police and firemen have always gotten along? We just didn't have a way to communicate. Our radios weren't synced up. Our communication was ineffective. And so we're learning that, you know, hey, we have all these resources, but what about, we didn't build strong partnerships. And we're all about that now. We're all about doing that. And you know, our health department is so responsive to my needs. You know, if I call Amaal and want to do something, she's right there. Says, Jonathan, run this program this way.
Yeah.
We'll assist. We'll send people out.
And
We do.
likewise.
Yeah.
You know, we've done a lot of interactive things that, you know, even prescription drug drop-off.
Right.
What an asset it is to have a community that provides that service and that does that and keeps those, you know, drugs out of just being, you know, mishandled.
Sure.
So it's just a lot of important programs as strategic partners. And,
Right.
and you know, the problem is that with a half-hour show like this, there's so much going on and so
Yeah.
many things we can do. And we, you know, I was thankful that Amaal asked me to talk about what law enforcement agencies are doing in Kendall County to help the citizens and how we can serve them better. And we want to do that. And there's a three-prong approach to our case assessment. You know, you used to go to a domestic call and, you know, you feel good, nobody got hurt.
Yeah.
You have to think, what's the root cause here? What's
Right.
going on?
Exactly.
You know, and the state's attorney's involved with it at great lengths too, with drug court and assessment, and hey, these are the counseling services we could provide. So we're all trying to work together to make sure that we not only go to incident solving, but problem solving. And
It's
so that's
interesting.
what we're trying to work on.
And it's interesting that you say that. I was thinking myself about domestic calls, for example, and it's not just as simple as going to a house, nobody gets hurt, okay, see you later. It's not that. It's really speaking with the individuals, finding out what's going on, and helping that family or that group of individuals living there solve their problems.
Yeah, what's the root cause happening here? What are the things? And look, law enforcement's learned some bad lessons, right? As you go there and you just say, hey, you know, you don't talk to him, you don't yell at her, and you clear, and you don't do that, you know, those follow-up things. Here's some counseling things. You know, a family in financial crisis can do some really dumb things.
Yeah.
Especially if they don't have the tools or just the knowledge of, hey, these are the places that can help. And, you know, it could be as simple as, you know, on a domestic call, especially finances, we have a wonderful food pantry that can help people with,
Sure.
you know, the grocery needs, so they can use that money for other things for the kids,
Yeah.
you know, that want to play football, or kids that want to get involved in a program but don't have the money to do it.
Right,
So
right.
we're working on these issues. You know.
Well, let's get into a bit of our topic here about something we've talked about, the opioid crisis.
Yes.
Not just us, but all around the country, really. And
Yes.
it's something that is prevalent throughout the United States. We've seen that Kendall County has had quite an increase. I think Jackie Purcell had, the coroner Jackie Purcell had said something to the fact that there were 13 opioid-related deaths last year. That number is up quite a bit from even recent years. And so, Dr. Tokars, let's talk about
Sure.
a bit of what you guys have seen, first off, and what's trying to be done to combat this
Sure.
crisis.
So first, some national stats on this. So approximately 64,000 drug overdose deaths occurred across the United States, and about 21% of those, that was a 21% increase from the year before. Now, of those 64,000, approximately 66% were opioid related.
Yeah.
And that is a 28% increase in the United States from the year before. Now, if we look at Illinois, the state of Illinois, we had, in the last count, which would have reflected 2016, over 2,000 drug-induced deaths. That is a 44% increase from the past 3 years.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of apples and oranges, but it's still very important. Over 80% of those 2,000 deaths were opioid related, and that represents, and this number is staggering, over a 70% increase in a 3-year period.
Yeah.
So when we look at Kendall County, there were 302 deaths last year in Kendall County. And we always want to talk about these reverently because we're sitting here locally.
Right.
So, yes, 13 of those were accidental drug-induced deaths. And that's around 5% of those deaths being drug-induced.
And that number, from what I remember Coroner Purcell saying too, is just of the deaths that were recorded in county. It's not from the individuals taken elsewhere, maybe to Copley or something like that.
That's correct. For every county, it's just counting the deaths that were recorded there in the county. So there were 24 accidental deaths, 13 accidental drug deaths. That's 54% of the accidental deaths being drug-induced. And this kind of thing that's happening nationally and statewide and locally is what every community needs to be discussing. Now, one thing that I want to say that we also need to pay attention to is addiction and hardship does not happen in a vacuum. And so I would just want to say a little bit about adverse childhood experiences, how important it is for people to realize that these kinds of things are relevant. So an example, here are some examples of adverse childhood experiences: emotional abuse, emotional neglect, household incarceration, household mental illness, household substance abuse, household violence, parental separation, physical abuse, physical neglect, sexual abuse. And what the literature talks about is dosing, that however many doses an individual is exposed to of these in their childhood increases the propensity of them being unhealthy, of having an addiction or other very unhealthy behaviors later on, and being less effective in school, in work, and relationships. And so I say that because understanding that is part of prevention, okay? Sometimes we think about prevention as helping the individual not get worse, and that's so true.
Right.
That's why we do treatment. But we also need to understand, so adverse childhood experiences are strongly related to the prevalence of a wide range of problems throughout a person's lifespan, including those associated with substance misuse. I know you're about to say something.
I just was going to say that it sounds like there's so many factors. You know, there's not one factor that leads into why we are seeing this increase, but it's multiple things and things that start that you wouldn't even think have anything to do with opioids or drug use.
That's right. That's right. Were you going to ask another question?
I guess I just was going to ask, why do we think that it's led to opioids necessarily?
Well, what I thought would help is to give a background of what we're seeing when we're assessing people, because addiction is a problem, a big problem, and opioid is the one that's happening now, but there are others right now that are happening. So about 3 or 4 years ago, I think about 3 years ago, I was testifying for one of our state Senate committees on addiction. And what I testified is what we were seeing in Kendall County when we were assessing, because we are a treatment environment. We are treating people for mental health issues and also for addiction issues. So what we saw is the #1 addiction that we saw 3 years ago. Do you want to guess what it was?
3 years ago? See if I can remember this, because I think it came up, if I remember, at the recent forum.
Yes, I mentioned it.
Let me remember. Was it alcohol use?
It was. And that was congruent with what we were seeing in many places in the nation. It was alcohol, then it was marijuana was a second piece, then cocaine, then opioid, and a distant fifth, benzodiazepine, which is an anti-anxiety. Now, right now, looking before we gathered just to talk about it a few days ago, marijuana was #1, opioid #2, alcohol #3, cocaine a very strong #4. I want to emphasize that that has not gone away. And benzodiazepine still a distant fifth, but increasing with people having difficulty with that.
Sure.
So my point in saying that is their addiction is something that we want to talk about, prevention to addiction, not just opioid addiction,
Right.
but addiction in general, because all addiction is a gateway for all other addiction.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the specific of a drug, I remember heroin was something that was mentioned at the forum that we recently attended.
When I count every single drug that is showing up in the system of these deaths, the one that came up most often was heroin.
Yeah.
Right behind it, cocaine.
Mm-hmm.
Right behind it, fentanyl.
Yeah.
So 2 of those are opioids, and there are a number of other things as well.
Yeah.
It's really heartbreaking.
Chief, question for you. When your officers and EMS officials, when they all go out on scenes, when they are dealing with overdose deaths, is a lot of this in line with what Dr. Tokars is saying about what you're seeing at the scenes? These individuals who have come across drugs and it's just become too late. They've been taken away or they get transferred out to another hospital. Is that what you guys are seeing out there?
A lot of times it is. I mean, we try the best we can to be effective in the prevention of drug use and the prevention of drugs and early intervention. And, there's an occasional time when an officer will make an arrest just on the possession of drugs without any usage involved at all, whether it's on a traffic stop finding drugs in the car. We've even, there's been cases of illegal transportation of alcohol and they're not drunk. So I mean, there's different things that we try to do to prevent it. But I think Amaal's right about a holistic approach about what we're doing.
Yep.
And we want to be involved in all 3 phases of what's happening. So prevention, treatment, and recovery. What can I do to be effective in all 3 phases of that?
Right.
What's my role in an addict's recovery?
Yep.
And look, I know right now, speaking off the cuff about recovery is, it's very important because we have repeat offenders. I mean, there's many times when we've used Narcan or a reversal drug to help a person who's in duress and without the Narcan they wouldn't have made it through. Yeah. And you do a Narcan safe, but we heard stories at the forum where there was 14 or 15 Narcan saves on the same individual.
Right. Right.
So at that recovery process, the treatment's the treatment's not working, so the recovery never happens.
Right.
So it's just a bad cycle. And look, we want to be effective in this because lives are at stake. And Amaal's so right about, this is, look, when you go to crisis, when something bad happens, when you have something that gets to 14 drug-related deaths in Kendall County, there's some things that we can do, and there's so much other things going on. These kids that are home and depressed and things, they seek out other things to do. So if we can spot these at-risk people, depression leads to drug use.
Right.
And prescription drugs work, but the problem is overuse. Yeah. And a person who goes and gets a prescription and the doctor gives them 13 milligrams and he decides to take 3 because he feels the dose he got didn't work. I'm still depressed. Yes. So it's a cycle.
And I did want to ask, one point I remember we keep talking about this forum, it was a grouping of a number of individuals that came together as kind of a step to talk towards helping fix this issue. But what I wanted to ask about was I remember Coroner Purcell talked about Grundy County nearby here had quite a bit lower number than what Kendall County, and I'm just curious, do we have any idea why maybe Kendall is attached to some of these other collar counties as having more opioid-related overdose deaths than somewhere like Grundy would be? Is it because we're a little bit closer up towards like the Chicago area? I don't know. It's probably an open-ended question for both of you because I don't know if it's being triggered down through other places or what.
Well, Grundy has quite a bit smaller population.
Sure.
When we grew, we're quite a bit larger. So this is a trend that we are seeing all over Illinois. I think one of the things that's very important for us to think about when we're thinking about prevention, Tyler, is the different kinds of prevention. So universal prevention is the prevention where we are talking to all of the people about what's happening, and things that they need to be careful about, and things that we want to point out or help them. So that's universal prevention, and that's something we're doing right now, and that's very important. But I want to mention some other kinds of prevention that are also very, very important.
Yeah.
Secondary prevention, or it's sometimes called selected or targeted intervention. And that is a prevention method where we're not talking to all the people, we're talking to individuals that we're working with individuals who we are knowing have a greater propensity. So for instance, at the health department, when we are treating individuals in mental health for post-traumatic stress, for adverse life experiences, or any other mental health issues, we are also thinking about targeted prevention, meaning there may not be any addiction present, but we know that when we're working with individuals on those things, we are able to help prevent other things from happening. And then indicated prevention are cases where it's already happening with this population or with this person, and we're going to work with them to help prevent it from getting worse. So our treatment of the health department would be an example of that. Drug court would be an example of that. We're in the jail on a daily basis working with individuals. Any of those things are called targeted prevention. But coming back up to this one in the middle, are called, indicated.
Yeah.
This one in the middle, targeted. This is so important. This is a piece that gets missed because it's not always directly related to individuals who already have addiction. It's supporting people who don't have it but have so many other risk factors and hardship going on in their life, and that we want to recognize. So I think this middle tier of prevention, this targeted, sometimes is overlooked, and there's many, many possibilities of the ways that we and many other entities in the community can recognize this and help.
Right. Well, you said it right there, and it's probably an education-based thing where it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't start after trying to treat what's going on, the problem. It's about starting earlier on to prevent it to begin with.
Yes.
What can people do in their homes, with their families, if they know someone who is maybe showing signs of these that could lead to something like an opioid addiction? What can people do?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that, because when we talked yesterday, I said the whole point of this is that everybody can do something. So 3 things that I want to mention, and there's such little things, but if we keep them in mind. The first thing is, even though not all of these deaths, not all of this addiction has to do with prescription medication. So not only do we want to use our prescriptions properly, lock them up, or when we're finished with them, get rid of them properly. So Chief Jonathan was talking about an event that they had in Plano, but also the sheriff's office. Every day you can drop off your meds. That's very, very important. But the other flip side of that is, remember, any addiction is a gateway for any other addiction. So if we want to keep our children safe, if we want in our own lives, pay attention to what we are doing with alcohol or prescription or illegal drugs, and realize that all addiction is a gateway to, can be gateway to addiction. So that's the first thing. I packed a lot into the first thing. The second thing is, every person knows someone else, or knows someone that knows someone else that struggles with an addiction. So if that is the case, refer them. We at the health department will be just honored to help them in any way we can. And if it's specifically for people that are needing treatment for an opioid addiction, we have right on our website an Illinois helpline just for that. So everybody can help somebody by realizing, you know what, there's something going on. Now that helpline is really only for opioid.
Yeah.
But they can also call us at 553-9100, and we are working with many people in many kinds of addiction. And if you talk to people who are getting addiction treatment, you will actually see that it's every kind of thing,
Yeah.
every kind of thing. Now, the third thing I want to reserve in consideration and compassion for people that are struggling with addiction. And when we think about contemplation, and this is something of the stages of change, and it's something that I have in myself, in the ability to recognize that in order to get help, I have to put myself in a state where I am thirsty for a life that is better and thirsty to make changes.
Yep.
And want to make differences, because those professionals cannot make it happen for me. They can put me in a bed and keep me safe for a few days, but I have to right here and here have made the choice that this is going to be so hard, and I want to do it. So that contemplation, I say out of compassion for individuals who really are struggling with this, that will make all the difference in successful treatment for them.
Yeah.
So when they're making that call, you want to be already thinking about, I want, I choose, I do choose something different.
Sure. I do want to ask, I know that Kendall County Board recently, just this week, did enter in with a couple of the other counties the opioid lawsuits that are going against some of the pharma companies. And I just was curious of your opinions. Is that maybe one step that would be helpful to a health department? If, I think there'd be about 25% that may go to the legal staffs or whatnot that are taking this on. But if these lawsuits from these surrounding counties, I think McHenry's involved in it, I believe Will County's involved with it. Bob Davidson, one of the board members, had talked about, he thinks that some of that money could go to help people that are working through these things. Maybe that means through the health department. I'm not sure, but do you think that that's a positive step towards combating this crisis, or are there other ways that we should look at to take that on?
I'm not in the discussions about whether or not we would receive assistance for the addiction services that we're doing throughout the county. But what I will say is, when we are speaking publicly, and that has caused an increase, that discussion and speaking publicly about how dangerous these opioids can be when they're misused, it is minimally raising that awareness of how serious things are. And just because they're legal, it doesn't mean we shouldn't be careful.
Sure.
I know
sure.
you've got a shortage
Oh,
of
yeah.
time.
And I just wanted to ask both of you, if you guys, do you have any final thoughts on our discussion today moving forward? I think we've been able to share a lot of good information. We do only have a short amount of time, obviously, but final thoughts from you, Chief, on moving forward in this whole process.
I really, I'd like to just say, just from the heart, I think really what it shows is we just need to care about each other, and family dinner together, things where you're involved in your kids' things. We're all busy in life, but nice discussions with your kids, talking about things, because it's important that people have a voice that is compassionate towards their needs. And I think somebody, people want to do the right thing. They have to figure out how to get the time to do the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Tokars, I guess any final thoughts from you? And this is not a process that's going to be solved easily, obviously.
It is not, but if everybody can do the pieces they can do and amplify that, because this is something that every citizen can be involved in, it's going to make a difference. And Jonathan just named a very important protective factor, which is one of those constructs. And a protective factor, families eating dinner together, is something that can prevent many difficulties in the future.
Yep. Well, there you go. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. This has been
Thank
Fox
you.
Valley Headline Makers.